In the winter of 1888, a lumberjack could freeze to death 200 yards from camp if he lost the one tool on his belt. Deep in the Northwoods, where the nearest doctor was 40 miles through the snow and wolves followed the smell of a felled deer, a logger's life hung on the steel he carried. Number 9 on this list saved more men from starvation than any rifle ever did. And number 3, most people think it was only for cutting timber, but the old camp records tell a darker story. These 25 tools and weapons were not just for the job. They were the difference between walking out of the woods come spring and never being found at all. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because a few of these could still save your life today. Let's count down from number 25. Number 25, the Barlow jackknife. Every man in camp carried one, folded shut in a trouser pocket worn smooth from years of habit. Costing barely a dime at the Wanigan, the camp store, the Barlow was the smallest blade a logger owned and the one he reached for 100 times a day. He whittled kindling with it, cut plug tobacco, dug splinters from a swollen thumb, and freed a bootlace frozen into a knot of ice. When a man went down with a rope tangled around his leg on the river drive, the jackknife came out first, sawing at the hemp before the current could pull him under. It looked like nothing, a folded scrap of bone and steel. But more than one lumberjack walked out of those woods alive because that cheap little blade was riding in his pocket when everything went wrong. Number 24, the whetstone. A dull edge in the Northwoods was a death sentence dressed up as an inconvenience. That is why a logger guarded his Arkansas whetstone like a family heirloom, a flat gray slab of novaculite wrapped in oilcloth and tucked deep in his turkey, the canvas sack that held everything he owned. Each night by the bunkhouse stove, men spat on the stone and drew their axes and knives across it in slow, patient circles, the soft rasp filling the room like a lullaby. An edge that could shave the hair off your arm meant a tree came down clean instead of pinching your blade. It meant a knife slid through a rope on the first pull. The stone itself was no weapon, but every weapon on this list was only as deadly as the last man who honed it, and this humble stone kept them all alive. Number 23, the belt hatchet. Half the weight of a felling axe and twice as quick to draw, the belt hatchet rode on a leather loop at a logger's hip like a sidearm. He used it for the small violence of camp life, splitting stove wood, driving tent stakes, knocking bark from a log before the peelers arrived. But its real value showed on the trail. A man caught out overnight in a blizzard could build a lean-to and a fire with nothing but a hatchet and the strength left in his arms. Against a cornered lynx or a rabid fox, it became the fastest thing on his body. Weighing barely a pound and a half and costing less than a day's wage, the belt hatchet was the tool a smart logger never took off, not even to sleep. Number 22, the sheath knife. Fixed blade, 6 inches of high-carbon steel, worn on the belt where a man's hand fell natural. The sheath knife was the frontier logger's constant companion, and unlike the folding jackknife, it never failed under pressure. No hinge to snap, no blade to fold back on his fingers in the cold. He gutted a deer with it, skinned a rabbit for the pot, cut frozen rope, and pried nails from a boot sole. On the drive, when a man went into the river between grinding logs, the sheath knife was what he stabbed into the timber to haul himself back up. Blacksmiths in logging towns forged them by the hundred, each one a little different, and a logger came to know his own blade the way he knew his own hand. Losing it in deep snow could mean losing everything. Number 21. The Bowie knife. Longer, heavier, and more fearsome than any working blade, the Bowie knife was the weapon a logger carried when he expected trouble from something with teeth or something with a grudge. Its wide, clip-point blade, sometimes 12 inches or more, could gut a black bear or settle a bunkhouse dispute that had gone past words. In the rough camps of Michigan and Minnesota in the 1870s, where 100 hard men lived crowded together for a winter with no law within days of travel, the Bowie was insurance. Most men never drew it in anger, but the sheer sight of that blade on a man's hip cooled a lot of tempers before whiskey turned them murderous. Out in the timber, it doubled as a machete, hacking through brush and clearing a path when the snow lay too deep to walk. Number 20. The skinning knife. Curved, thin, and wickedly sharp, the skinning knife was the tool that turned a dead animal into food and warmth before both froze solid. A logger who trapped or hunted on his day off relied on it to peel a hide clean without puncturing the meat beneath. That hide became a blanket, a pair of mittens, or trade goods worth real money in town. In a hard winter, when the camp ran short of fresh meat, a man handy with a skinning knife kept whole bunkhouses fed on venison and rabbit. The blade's shape was no accident. Its upswept curve followed the natural line between skin and flesh, letting a skilled hand work fast, in failing light, with numb fingers. Speed mattered, because a carcass left too long in the cold stiffened past, working, and a wasted animal was a meal no one got back. Number 19. The draw knife. Two handles, one long blade, pulled toward the body in smooth strokes that peeled wood like an apple. The draw knife was a shaping tool used to smooth axe handles, carve tent pegs, and strip bark from logs bound for the mill. But in the isolation of a winter camp, where a broken handle could sideline a man for days, and a sidelined man did not eat, the draw knife meant self-reliance. A logger could carve a new axe helve from a length of hickory in an afternoon, saving himself the long walk to town and the cost of a store-bought replacement. It shaved snowshoe frames, whittled splints for a broken finger, and shaped the wooden pins that held a sled together. Quiet and unglamorous, the draw knife was the tool that let a man fix his own world before it fell apart around him. Number 18. The FROE. An L-shaped blade struck with a wooden club. The froe split logs into shingles, shakes, and clean straight boards without a saw. In a country where the nearest lumber mill might be a week's haul away, the froe let loggers roof their own shanties and floor their own bunkhouses from the trees standing right outside the door. A man laid the blade along the grain, hammered it down with a maul, and levered off a board as smooth as anything a mill could produce. That skill kept a camp dry and warm through months of snow, and a dry, warm camp was the difference between a healthy crew and one carried off by pneumonia. The froe demanded patience and a good eye for grain, but the logger who mastered it could turn a single fallen pine into a weatherproof roof over his family's head. Number 17. The ADE. Held like a hoe and swung between the feet, the adze was the tool that flattened round logs into squared timber and hewn beams. A skilled hewer could stand astride a log and chop a flat face inch by inch, the blade passing a hair's breadth from his own boots with every stroke. It was dangerous work. One bad swing, and a man opened his own leg to the bone, miles from help. Yet the adze built everything that mattered in the Northwoods: the bunkhouses, the log bridges, the dams that controlled the spring drive. A logger who could wield one earned respect and better pay. Beyond its work, the adze in a strong pair of hands was a formidable thing to face, and no wolf or wildcat ever tested a man swinging one. It shaped the frontier one flat face at a time. Number 16, the brush hook. Part machete, part sickle, the brush hook cleared the tangled undergrowth that choked the forest floor and hid every hazard a logger feared. Before a tree could come down safe, the ground around it had to be cleared, brush, saplings, and the deadfall that could trip a running man when a trunk began to topple the wrong way. The brush hook did that work in wide, sweeping strokes, its heavy curved blade biting through green wood a saw would have jammed on. In deep country, it cut trails through thickets no axe could manage quickly, and a clear trail meant a man could run when the timber let go unexpectedly. Loggers knew that most camp deaths came not from the tree itself, but from the panic of trying to flee across ground nobody had cleared. The brush hook made that ground survivable. Number 15, the cant hook. A stout wooden handle with a hinged steel hook. The cant hook let one man roll a log that weighed as much as a wagon. Bucking and skidding timber was the most dangerous work in camp, and a loose log rolling downhill had crushed more loggers than any falling tree. The cant hook gave a man leverage and, just as important, control, letting him check a rolling log before it built up killing speed or pin it fast while others worked. On the icy skid roads of a Wisconsin winter, that control was the thin line between a day's labor and a funeral in the spring thaw. The tool looked crude, a hook on a stick, but the physics behind it multiplied a man's strength many times over. A logger who could read the roll of a log and set his hook right was a man other men trusted with their lives. Number 14, the peavey. In 1858, a Maine blacksmith named Joseph Peavey watched loggers struggle with cant hooks that slipped off the logs and fouled together in the river, and he built something better. He added a sharp iron spike to the end of the handle so the tool bit into the wood instead of sliding off, and the peavey was born. On the spring drive, when tens of thousands of logs jammed shoulder to shoulder in a raging river, the peavey was the only thing standing between order and catastrophe. Rivermen danced across the churning logs, spiking and levering the key timber loose to break a jam before the pressure built to an explosion that could flatten a town downstream. It was the most dangerous job in America, and the peavey was the tool that made it survivable. A century and a half later, loggers still swear by the design, unchanged. Number 13, the pike pole. A long wooden shaft, sometimes 16 feet, tipped with a steel point and hook. The pike pole let a riverman reach out over the water and guide floating logs without ever stepping onto them. On the drive, a man on the bank or in a bateau used it to nudge a straggling log back into the current, snag a runaway before it grounded, or reach a drowning companion swept beyond arm's length. That last use saved lives every season. The river drive killed men by the hundred across the decades, most of them drowned when they fell between the logs, and the pike pole was often the only thing long enough to reach them in time. Held out flat, it could pull a man from the water like a fish hook lands a trout. Loggers called the drive the most beautiful and most deadly work they ever did, and the pike pole worked both sides of that line. Number 12, the splitting wedge and maul. When an axe alone could not conquer a knotty giant, the logger drove iron wedges into the crack with a heavy wooden maul, splitting timber that would otherwise have defeated a whole crew. The rhythm of steel on steel rang through the winter woods, a sound as steady as a heartbeat. But the wedge did more than split firewood. Loggers used it to free a saw pinched fast in a leaning tree, a deadly situation where a bound blade meant a man had to stand in the fall zone and fight the timber loose. Driving a wedge into the cut opened the kerf and released the saw before the tree decided to come down on its own terms. It was a small piece of shaped iron, but in the right hands it undid the single most common trap that killed careless loggers, the pinch that would not let go. Number 11, caulked boots. Loggers called them corks, leather boots with rows of sharp steel spikes driven through the soles, and they were the only reason a man could stand on a wet, spinning log in the middle of a river and not die. On the drive, a riverman lived on top of the logs, running across a moving carpet of timber that rolled and dipped beneath him, and a single slip meant going under into the crushing dark between the logs. The caulks bit into the bark and held, giving grip where smooth leather would have sent a man skating to his death. In the bunkhouse, the rule was ironclad, no corks on the floor, because those spikes tore through wood and flesh alike. More than one fight ended when a man stomped a downed opponent with a caulked boot, a brutal reminder that the same spikes that saved lives on the river could take one in an instant. Number 10, snowshoes. When 4 feet of snow lay over the Northwoods and a man had to walk out, snowshoes were the only thing between him and a slow death in a drift. Loggers wove their own from ash frames and rawhide lacing, the babiche cut thin and strung tight so it would carry a man's weight across powder that would swallow him to the chest. A logger caught away from camp by a sudden storm, a lost hunter, an injured man being hauled toward help. All of them lived or died by whether snowshoes were strapped to their feet. The draw knife shaped the frames, the skinning knife cut the lacing, and a good pair took days to make and a lifetime to trust. Wolves could run atop the crust that broke under a man's boot, and without snowshoes, a lone logger could not outdistance them. On the winter trail, they were not a convenience. They were survival itself. Number 9, the wire snare. No tool on this list fed more starving loggers than a coil of thin brass wire twisted into a noose. When the camp cook ran short and the pork barrel echoed empty, a man who knew how to set snares along a rabbit run could put fresh meat in the pot without firing a shot or wasting precious powder. He looped the wire at the height of a hare's head along its trodden path through the brush, anchored it to a springy sapling, and let the animal do the rest. A dozen snares checked at dawn could feed a bunkhouse. In the deep winter of an isolated camp, when supply sleds could not get through for weeks, that quiet skill kept whole crews alive. The wire weighed nothing, cost pennies, and never ran out of ammunition. Old loggers said a man who could not set a snare had no business in the woods at all. Number 8, flint and steel. Before dependable matches reached the far camps, a logger carried a fire steel and a chip of flint in a tin against his chest, kept dry and warm no matter the weather. Fire was life in the Northwoods. A man who could not make one when the temperature fell past 30 below did not survive the night. He struck the steel against the flint's edge, showered sparks onto a nest of dry tinder, and coaxed the ember to flame with slow, steady breath. Fingers so cold they could barely feel the striker. Matches failed when wet, but flint and steel worked soaked, frozen, or dropped in the snow. Every experienced logger knew that story of the man found dead beside a pile of unlit matches, ruined by a river dunking, and every one of them carried steel and flint as backup because of it. Fire was the one thing the woods would not forgive a man for losing. Number 7. The pocket compass. The Northwoods swallowed men whole. Mile after mile of identical pine, no landmarks, no roads, and a gray sky that hid the sun for days, and a logger who wandered off the skid trail could lose himself within sight of camp. The small brass pocket compass, no bigger than a watch, was the difference between walking a straight line back to the bunkhouse and circling in the snow until the cold took him. Cruisers, the men who scouted timber, lived by their compasses, marking claims across townships of trackless forest. But every logger who left the beaten path carried one too, because the woods played tricks that no amount of experience could overcome. Snow erased tracks in minutes. Panic set in fast when a man realized he did not know which way was home. That steady needle, always pointing north, had talked more lost loggers back to warmth and safety than any search party ever did. Number 6. The single-shot rifle. Cheap, reliable, and deadly accurate, the single-shot rifle was the meat gun of the logging frontier, the weapon a man reached for when the camp needed a deer and could not afford to miss. It fired one round, then demanded a careful reload, and that discipline made men into marksmen who did not waste a shot or a scrap of powder. A logger who dropped a buck at 100 yards with a single shot fed the camp for a week. Beyond hunting, the rifle stood guard against the wolves that circled a camp in the lean months, drawn by the smell of blood and bone from the cookhouse. The crack of that rifle echoing across the frozen lake told every man for miles that the camp had a hunter, and a camp with a hunter did not go hungry. It was not fast, but in patient hands it never failed. Number 5. The double-barreled shotgun. Where the rifle demanded precision, the shotgun forgave a shaking hand and a moving target. Loaded with buckshot, it was the weapon a logger trusted against a charging bear or a pack of wolves closing in the dark, when there was no time to aim and a spray of lead was worth more than a single careful ball. Loaded with birdshot, the same gun brought down grouse and ducks to stretch the camp's monotonous diet of salt pork and beans. 2 barrels meant a second chance, and in a close encounter with something that meant to kill you, that second chance was everything. Camps kept a shotgun by the cookhouse door and another in the foreman's shanty, always loaded, always ready. When a bear broke into the meat cache in the dead of night, drawn by the scent of a winter's provisions, the roar of both barrels was the sound of a camp defending its own survival. Number 4. The Colt revolver. 6 shots on the hip, the revolver was the weapon a logger carried against the one predator no other tool could stop: another man. The winter camps drew hard characters from every corner of the country, and when the ice broke and wages were paid in cash, the road to town filled with thieves and claim jumpers who knew a logger carried a season's pay in his boot. The revolver leveled that field. It rode fast to hand, fired 6 times without reloading, and its very presence kept honest men, honest and dishonest men, at a distance. In the lawless timber country of the 1880s, where the nearest sheriff might be 100 miles off, a man's own pistol was often the only law he could count on. Most loggers never fired it at another human being, but the ones who survived a robbery on a lonely road credited that revolver, and nothing else, for the fact that they walked away. Number 3. The Winchester lever-action rifle. Most folks picture the Winchester as a cowboy's gun, but in the Northwoods it was a logger's lifeline and the fastest-firing weapon most camps ever owned. Where the single shot demanded a slow reload, the Winchester's lever threw the next round into the chamber in the time it took to blink, letting one man put a dozen shots downrange without lowering the gun from his shoulder. Against a pack of wolves swarming a downed horse, or a bear that took the first bullet and kept coming, that speed was the difference between a story told by the stove and a body found in the spring. Loggers who could afford one, and it cost a good chunk of a month's pay, treated it as the finest thing they owned. The rifle hunted, it defended, and in the worst emergencies it signaled 3 fast shots, the universal cry for help across the silent frozen miles. In a country that tried to kill a man 12 ways before breakfast, the Winchester answered back faster than anything else on his belt. Number 2, the crosscut saw. The great 2-man crosscut saw, some of them 12 feet long with teeth like a shark's jaw, brought down the giants of the old-growth forest that no axe could conquer alone. 2 loggers worked it in perfect rhythm, pulling and never pushing, the long steel blade singing through a trunk 8 feet thick until the tree gave its warning groan. Called the misery whip for the sweat it wrung out of a man, the crosscut was also a survival tool of the first order. It cut the firewood that kept a camp from freezing, the timber that built its shelters, the logs that spanned its rivers as bridges. A crew that lost its saw to a snapped tooth or a rusted blade lost its ability to warm and house itself. Men filed and set those teeth every night with religious care, because a sharp crosscut was the beating heart of the whole camp, and a dull one was the beginning of the end. Number 1, the double-bit axe. And in first place, the tool that defined the frontier logger and saved his life more times than he could count, the double-bit axe. 2 edges, one kept razor keen for felling, and the other left slightly blunt for the rough work of knots and dirty bark. It was the first thing a logger picked up in the morning and the last thing he set down at night. He felled trees with it, limbed them, split his firewood, built his shelter, and shaped every other wooden tool he owned. Lost in a storm with nothing else, a man with a double-bit axe could build fire, shelter, and a signal and walk out alive. Cornered by a wolf or a wildcat, it was the weapon always in his hands. Weighing 3.5 pounds of perfectly balanced steel on a slim hickory helve, it was so central to a logger's identity that men gave their axes names and would sooner lose a finger than lose the axe. Every skill on this list, every tool, every weapon, came back to the man and his axe standing alone against the whole vast weight of the Northwoods. It was more than a tool. It was the frontier logger himself, distilled into steel and wood. Across all 25, from the humble Barlow jackknife to the mighty double-bit axe, these forgotten tools tell the story of men who lived at the far edge of the map, where the woods gave nothing for free and took everything from the careless. Some, like the peavey and the caulked boots, were built for the deadly beauty of the river drive. Others, like the flint and steel and the wire snare, were the quiet difference between a warm night and a frozen grave. Every one of them was carried by men who trusted their lives to steel and their own 2 hands. The frontier is gone, and the great pines with it. But the wisdom those loggers carried on their belts endures, proof that the right tool in a steady hand could turn the harshest country on earth into a place a man could survive. Which one would you have carried? Tell me in the comments.